So next up is Inside Marie. Inside Marie is one of these final three stories that I have a really hard time ordering them. I just, like, by any objective criteria of the art or how the story goes or anything, they all deal very down to earth, deal with these different kinds of traumas and abuses that we're getting very familiar with in his work. But I think these are the ones where the art and the writing is most well handled. There's going to be spoilers in these, so, spoiler alerts. But the way he twists and turns and will surprise you throughout these stories is all really interesting. And I think these are the ones where he explores his own issues most thoroughly and most impactfully. It makes the most interesting stories out of them. I'm just ordering them based on which ones I'm resonating with the most, I guess, is what's creating the order in these. So the first one here is Inside Marie. This started in 2012, so some of this would have been running concurrent to a lot of what was going on in Happiness. I think that's a pretty standard way for Oshimi to work. He's doing that now with Blood on the Tracks and Welcome Back Alice, where he's got the darker, like more psychological horror one, and then he does what seems, at least at first, like the lighter kind of comedic one. Inside Marie is still pretty dark, but you see that he's kind of running two stories at once oftentimes, so he must be pretty quick as well. Inside Marie starts as a very straightforward body swap story. So you have Mari Yoshizaki. You have a girl wake up and looking at her body like, what the heck is going on here? Like, this is not my body. And you find out very, very quickly that what's happened is this character here, Isao Komori, has been obsessively following this girl, Marie. He's a real schlub, real loser. It seems like this is actually pretty close to Oshimi's actual story, where he was supposed to be going to university, but he just fucked off and sat around and played video games and jerked off all the time. And he's got, bags of trash. So he's a real loser of a character living off of the parents' support. And he's been stalking this girl, not stalking her, but he's been noticing this girl, Mary, at the convenience store he goes to at night. And there's a night where he starts following her home. In this scene where Isao's following Mary home, there's this pretty standard Oshimi moment where he gives the big double page spread of the cute girl turning and acknowledging the guy. Also kind of this playful, challenging look that he's so good at. This mixed up emotion where it's like she's seeing him, she's calling him out, she's kind of flirting with him, she's kind of challenging him. He's really good at those complex looks, and I don't know, if you've ever gotten a mixed look like that, you'll kind of know the intensity of it. I think that's part of why I resonate with his work is I've encountered some characters like this. I'll talk more about it in the final volume I review. But she gives him this look, and so you're led to believe that there's this exchange happening in that moment where he jumps into her body and occupies her. So it starts out with just being a body swap comedy almost, where he's having to deal with, oh my God, what do I do with the period? Oh my God, I've got boobs. I love looking at boobs. I can touch. Oh no, I'm not going to do that. It's a violation. So I think it's a pretty standard formula in manga. I'm not sure, but I get the sense the body swap story is a pretty common one. Also, looking back into his interest in the trans again, occupying the body of a woman. He definitely writes essays in this one, trying to give himself a pass that he's not trying to sexualize the interest in becoming women, but it's hard to totally swallow that pill when there are so many sexualized encounters in here. So I don't know that the pass he gives himself totally works, but he complicates that again later on in a really interesting way. And even though it's spoilers, I got to talk about it. So then we're introduced to this other character, Yori Kekuguchi. Yori is coming along, and as again we've got this less cool girl, the outsider girl, Apparently she's got a crush on Mary and really knows a lot about her, enough to see that Mary, who's the really popular girl, smart, cute, beautiful, looks like a model, all that stuff, is not acting like herself. And so challenges Isao as Mary, who are you? What's going on? And that's where you start to get the love triangle in this one between the two girls and the boy, except in this one, the boy is in the girl's body. I will say Inside Marie plays out a little bit more slowly, at least at first. There's a lot of that body swap comedy, the erotic fiction and stuff going on there. But by the end of volume 3, Oshimi pulls one of his standard twists as Yori and Isao and Marie are exploring, like, where did the real Mary go? How do we get her back into her body? They find that evidence that she was actually spying, the real Mary was actually spying on Isao before the transformation happened. She was looking at him, drawing pictures of him. He played video games again. He also masturbated while on the PC. And for dinner, he had a convenience store curry set with pork cutlet. You don't know how good you have it, so please don't ever change. And here you start to get a much more interesting story. So again, he starts with a genre, is kind of giving you what you expect, giving you some probably more unsettling than normal instances of scenes in those dramas and then those genres, and then will twist it really, really far, where now all of a sudden this girl is probably a stalker, and you still don't know, like, is Isao actually in Mary's body? Did she do something to make that swap happen? And is she hanging out in his body now, enjoying his life? There's also some, hints that maybe this girl is just psychotic and making it all up. At this point, we're assuming that Isao is, Mary's probably living in his body, that she swapped with him. It makes it really thematically interesting, right? Here's this schlub of this guy and this popular girl that everyone wants to be, and she feels so confined by her role that she has to play, that she's sitting there dreaming about being someone else, being this guy, having all of the kind of privileges that come with someone just being able to sit around while their parents pay for everything and fuck off, and no one's chasing them, no one's lusting over them, no one's expecting anything of them. So makes this story really, really emotionally and socially complex, I think. Big time jump here. A lot of the story is involved, in just trying to find out where Mary is, trying to figure out the relationship between Isao and Mary. There's a lot of scenes where Isao and they go to meet the real Isao, and he's still him. Mary's not in his body, but the Isao and Mary is so much of a good stand-in for Isao that they're able to hang out and like play video games together. They have very strange sexual encounters together. So then it becomes kind of this fantasy where it's like, oh my God, like my ideal girlfriend would be me, but in a sexy female body. And that's playing out for a while. And you're still feeling very uncomfortable. Like, okay, Oshimi, like you're saying that this is you trying to understand the world from a woman's perspective, but really it's just you've put yourself in a meat puppet body that you can manipulate. So it's very uncomfortable in that way. As the investigation about what happened to the real Mary, though, continues, like where her mind wound up, at least, or whatever, there's phone calls that are being had, and there starts to be clues coming out about some event that maybe happened in real Mary's life that was traumatic to her as well. And so Yori and Isao in Mary's body go and track down this Ferris wheel that shows up in a photograph. And they go up on the Ferris wheel, and the Mary Isao character starts to have flashbacks of a little girl named Fumiko, and also this abusive, angry, motherly figure. And here you can see just this absolutely terrifying face of this mother. So this starts to investigate not just the abuse by a classmate or someone your age, but starts to get into the idea of this abusive, angry mother that shows up again in Blood on the Tracks and seems to be a core part of what Oshimi's trying to deal with. It's very obvious that he is dealing with his own demons in these stories. There's memory of grandma dying, grandma calling this little girl Fumiko, obviously is a nice character, but the mother's a bad character. And what you start to come to realize is that there was an abusive event where the little girl Fumiko was forced to change her name to Mary, and that there's kind of this split in her personality that causes a psychotic break. Also, just at the end of this volume, you get a sense of some of the really beautiful, like, single images that Oshimi can create. These really mood pieces here that say a lot in just one panel. He's just such a stunning artist and composer. And in the final volume, it comes out that indeed Mary is just a psychotic girl that is having this mental break. Basically, she has studied this Sao character so carefully because of her abusive past with her abusive mother, that she's fantasized so hard about becoming him and studied him so much that she tricks herself into believing that she is him body swapped into her. And so then the whole body swap thing is subverted. A lot of the weird sexual dynamics in it then get much more complicated. And I think as the series goes, you really do see Oshimi kind of reformulating his ideas about gender dynamics and things like that. Also, he's constantly writing in those little essays in the back. But just some of the distortions, like in the other books, these abstractions, these more fucked up, like kids drawing looking types of things, as Mary's going back, and now everything that's been repressed is coming out. All the memories are coming out. You get some really, really intense scenes. And then at the end of it all, you still get a pretty, I don't want to totally spoil it, but you get some real, resolution for the characters and a really beautiful ending to it. So really enjoyed this book. Part of the reason I really enjoyed this is because I spent so long thinking, okay, he's failed at this one. Like, he's set out to do this thing. He said it explicitly in his essays. And it really just looks to me like this is an excuse for this guy to, like I said, have this little female meat puppet to sexualize. But the twists and turns throughout, the idea that maybe she was stalking him, and then the long, slow development of exploring, like, what happened to her and the way it all culminates. I think this is a really, really good book, and it shows Oshimi's power. I think this is, where he was probably really, really developing his ability to turn a story on its head like that. This and Happiness seem to both have those big turns and swerves that now I associate with pretty much all of his stories. So I think this is absolutely one of his best. Like with any of these last four, Happiness, Inside Maria, and the next two, I think some of it's just based on which one you read first, because you're not expecting any of these things. Sorry if I'm spoiling it for people in the video, but I think for most people, their opinions about which one's the best is going to be based on which one they read first, and then which one, themes kind of coincide with their own life experience a little bit more. The themes in this one don't really coincide with any experiences I've had, so that probably also keeps it a little lower on the list, even though I think it's a phenomenal comic and better than most other things I read. Another thing that I want to make sure that we get to is that Sean has a new book coming out from Living the Line called Her Frankenstein. And when I first got to read the PDF proof of that, I thought, oh, wow, this is very similar in theme and tone to SHUZO OSHIMI'S work. And so anyone who's a fan of SHUZO OSHIMI'S work, that thematically, I think you will really enjoy this historical manga that came out way, way, way earlier than Oshimi's work. I think I don't know the date on it. I haven't been involved in that project really other than reading it, but the late 60s, early 70s, I think, on Her Frankenstein. And so seeing someone deal with the similar themes and stuff in an earlier context, but with as much intensity as the SHUZO OSHIMI work, was really, really interesting to me. So I'm going to go ahead and play a preview now of Her Frankenstein, and if you are a fan of SHUZO OSHIMI'S work, I really suggest that you check it out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and enjoy the preview of Her Frankenstein.
just for one day. Let me see you stripped down to the bone. Let me see you stripped down to the bone.
As we get into the final two, I have a really hard time being succinct, but I'll do my best. Blood on the Tracks. This is still coming out, so Oshimi could ruin it, or he could push it over the edge to make it my favorite one. I very much doubt, given his track record, that he's going to ruin it. But also, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. But this is 15 volumes in, I think. So this is the longest form work that he's done so far. It's also the first one of his that I read. So this is this volume here. I've done a video on it singly, but I'm going to do it in context now of everything else. I bought this on a whim. I just kind of thought the cover art looked nice. I had heard about Shuzo Oshimi's Happiness and Flowers of Evil, which Flowers of Evil is obviously, I think, his best work, given that that's the last one left to talk about. So it was a new series that was just starting, and I could dip into it from the beginning, and I was absolutely blown away. This first volume left me so unsettled, and I didn't even know why until the end, because it's basically just a family hanging out for the whole volume. I couldn't figure out why I thought this was such a horrific story until the end of the volume. And the way that he draws in this book is just so intense, the expressions and stuff. I was just so sold on him as an author that obviously I had to go out and get everything else, even though it's cost quite a bit. So the story opens right out the gate with this child and his mother, and they're going out, and this is like a key memory for the whole book. You can see here Oshimi's painting in this beautiful watercolor look, and they're coming up on this cat, and the cat's just laying there. The mom says it's asleep. She says, go ahead and pet it, and then points out that it's dead. And then you get the mom, Seiko, here, and this image in particular shows up over and over again. And as soon as I flipped to this image, like 4 pages in, I just thought, like, man, this look is so full of love and care, and it's so beautiful, but something in her eyes looked so dead that it just scared the shit out of me. And immediately thought, I don't know how you get such a it's such a static look, almost like there's hardly any expression, the slightest twist of the mouth, like just a slight squint of the eyes, but he's able to make it just convey this really confusing mix of like love, adoration, and something else going on, or like it's too much love looking at you. I don't know. I immediately felt that. And that is the core of this book, is the mother who just will not let her son go and is so abusive. And this is the one where you really start to understand that not only was he abused by a classmate, which Flowers of Evil makes very, very clear, but he also suffered greatly something from his mother. So anyways, you get Seiko, her son, Seiichi Osabe. Obviously, they have this very intense, close relationship. You see the mother here with another one of those very caring, very tender, but slightly unsettling looks where it's almost like an invasive kind of care. And they go through this little morning routine of like, would you like a pork bun or a red bean bun? And he always says pork. And you just get to, I don't know, you just, in this first volume, really just seeing family goings-ons, dinners with relatives, stuff like that. Every now and then you'll get this flashback to this dead cat that for some reason she let him pet. And so even though there's just this barest hint that something unsettling is going on in the surface, you get it. You just get it through and through. You meet his relatives, his aunt and uncle, and his cousin Shige. And so Seiichi, Sei, and Shige, hang out, you just have conversations with their family. It's all pretty bland and boring, but underneath the surface you get like a tension in the family in the way that it's written. The family then goes out on a hike. Something else that's really nice throughout all of the books, but I thought was particularly unsettling, is throughout the first book, every 40 pages, there's this little drop of blood down by the number, and it doesn't really line up with anything in the book. It's just kind of every 40 pages. That carries throughout the series, but in this one in particular, where there's all these fairly pleasant just family interactions, none of this stuff is particularly intense. Just these little drops of blood in the corner are unsettling as well. They give that sense that there's something else going on. The family goes out on a hike, and then the series starts to kick into high gear at the end of this volume, where Seiichi and Shige peel off from the family. They're having a conversation. They're kind of having fun together, and then mom shows up, and there's a couple like false starts of someone almost falling off a cliff. They're very high up, and then the mom just goes and pushes Shige off the cliff. You get the sense that she's seen Seiichi form a bond with someone else and cannot tolerate that, and so she pushes her nephew off the cliff, and then the story really kicks in. You get a sense of like, how fucked up this lady is. And the thing that sold me on his artwork in this volume and continues to amaze me, especially in this series, is how good Shuzo Oshimi is with expressions. And so much of the book happens in these really decompressed, slow moments where the horror, the underlying horror of it all is told just through these subtle zooms and expressions, as this character is just like, Seiichi's just like, what the fuck did I just see? And then his mom slowly turns and gives him that exact same smile that he remembers from a kid, where it's like she loves him too much. And then just his reaction of looking away, the bulging out eyeballs, the mouth partially open. He starts to have problems speaking. So you get the sense that Oshimi, given the Shino lost her voice, and this character in this book having a hard time speaking, you get the sense that he had a hard time speaking as a kid, which he does talk about in one of the afterwards in one of the books. But just the panic setting in, like as someone who struggled with anxiety and panic attacks the majority of my life, this buzzing sensation that you get when you hyperventilate is just represented very real. It's just so intensely and perfectly drawn. And then the mom here reacting like, oh my god, something bad happened, go get everyone else, like she wasn't the one that did it. The desperation in her face. And then at the end, hear this kind of loving acceptance where she starts to suck him back in now, and is going to basically make him lie with her for a significant number of volumes, is just like their relationship about hiding this lie. And these close-ups of the face, the lean into realism with more cross-hatching, the less exaggerated eyes, I think really helps sell a lot of the emotion. And it's all stuff that I just absolutely fell in love with. I felt like stylistically he was doing something different in this book. His ability to capture expression, his ability to let things just ride for like 200 pages almost, but still give you this sense of some seething nastiness underneath, I just thought was so masterful. And so this has to be high on my list. Maybe some people who have read Happiness and Flowers of Evil and Inside Marie, it feels a little formulaic to them at this point, so maybe this wouldn't be as highly ranked, but this is absolutely one of my favorite comics of all time now. And I think that part of it, it's amazingly well done, but I got to see all of that stuff before I really knew his tricks. A quick look into a sequence in Volume 2. This is where Yuiko, a girl that he's started to form a relationship at school with, that Seiichi's forming a relationship, wrote him a letter and is basically asking to be his girlfriend. And mom finds this, and it's obvious at this point that mom does not want Seiichi forming relations with anyone but her. So she finds this letter and just the, again, rendering of emotions throughout this scene, the manipulation in her expressions, and his reaction, the way that he's visibly being manipulated throughout this scene, I just think is so intense, where she's saying, I won't accept this, like, I won't accept this letter, let's get rid of it. This image right here, where we lean back more into the realism. The eyes are a little bit large still, but much more realistically rendered than normal in a manga. The uncomfortable closeness between them, almost looks like they're getting ready to kiss, but then the split, just using the page split to keep them separated as well. Her crying and him wide-eyed, like, oh my God, I'm hurting my mother. Him struggling to speak. All of this just is so intensely drawn out. It's really easy to breeze through all of this where there's no lettering or anything, or it's very minimal, him stuttering. I think the mouth gets a little over exaggerated there, but her just staring at him finally crying, but like he's trying to say something he can't. It's almost like a bad dream where you're trying to scream for help but you can't. His big puppy eyes, and then the way that she pulls him back on top of her, and so kind of sexualizes herself, and is selling her as like the woman in his life. It's a very uncomfortable pose here. I don't know, you don't get a sense for exactly what kind of abuses Oshimi's mom took out on him, but it's pretty obviously there were some, and that that's all so intensely rendered here. And then she forces him to rip up this letter, and you see the sorrow in his eyes and the confusion as like his first real connection to someone outside of his mom is ripped up, and then she finalizes it with a probably overly sexual but potentially just tender mother kiss as well. It's just everything about that, and then him like giving in and looking happy and soothed by all of that at the end is just gut-wrenching stuff to look at. In Volume 3, you get to see a little bit more of the dynamics of the family. Here, again, we have a really intense expression of the angry mother. We also saw that in the Inside Marie. I think it's even better rendered here, even more well-rendered. And it just feels like you have to have lived through this stuff to be able to render it so well. And that's part of what makes this work, as uncomfortable it is. You see Shige is in a coma. He didn't die. So there's an ongoing investigation about what happened to him. And the mother figure is definitely making Seiichi lie for her. And they have a lot going on. He also continues to explore his relationship with the young girl off to the side. And there's this very intense scene where he's confronting her and being like, I know you did it. Why did you did it? Why did you did it? Why did you do it? And this scene's also super emotionally intense, where like her personality just goes away. He's begging her, don't run away. Then she plays like the nice mommy again, and then starts choking him and asserting her physical dominance over him with this blank expression. Hear the horror in his eyes as mom betrays him, and then she lets him go. But she's reasserted her dominance and basically sucking him into continuing to cover for her. We'll take a big time jump between volumes now. There's a lot that goes on with him and that girl and the mom and all this other stuff. But in volume 9, you get a big time jump, and you have Shiche starting to remember more of what happened when he was a kid and what the incident with the cat was. You see that his mother kind of didn't want to be a mother. She wanted to disappear and live her own life, and so he has to disappear too. And she takes him up to this hill overlooking the city, and you can see like she's being very playful with him and happy, but there's like a desperation in her eyes, and she just chucks her kid off, and he gets thrown down the hill, totally beat up and battered. And then you get this weird like moment in her eyes where she's like, well, it didn't work, and she chooses to settle into her role as her mother, and makes that her identity, I guess, at that point. Is like, okay, I guess I'm being told, like, my kid's not going to die. I'm just going to have to be mom. So he's going to be my everything. And as they're on the way home from that incident, is when he's just absolutely betrayed by his mother. That's when they also see the dead cat. And that's this memory that he keeps flashing back to, the memory of that look that his mother gave him, where she's like faking. Now you understand, she's almost faking this love for him. That's not love, it's some other thing going on there. Just nailed that expression. You see him having this moment here where his expression goes haywire as he's like having to deal with it as a young kid, and he's saying, the cat is me killed and left behind. And he's having that moment here where he basically writes out, he suppresses that all of this happened to him. So really intense moment where you understand everything that's going on. You get the sense too, a lot of times, because of the way Shuzo Oshimi titles his work, that the titles oftentimes don't make sense until you get way further into the series. Not all the time, but you could tell that he has a general idea of where the story's going very early on. But then based on his writings, you see that he also leaves a lot of room for exploration. Actually, I lied. Volume 10 doesn't have a time jump yet. At the end of Volume 10, Shige is back awake now, and he goes out on a walk with Shiichi, and they go back to the spot where Shiichi got pushed off the cliff by his mother. So volume 11 opens up with Shiichi in the middle of a psychotic break. He's up there with Shige, remembering what happened to him, and he's going into this kind of psychedelic sequence where he's remembering what happened to him, and he's also starting to see himself through his mother's eyes. He's seeing his cousin through his mother's eyes. He's looking at himself thinking, oh, like, mother's actually uglier than I think she is. She's not the beautiful girl. I'm ugly through her eyes, or at least this is how she sees herself. So he's really starting to come to terms with everything that's happened, but it's also completely distressing. You see here how like scrunched up and whiny of a baby and ugly he looks. You see how the mom's more distorted and ugly. He has this sensation that he actually was the one that forced her to do this. This psychotic break, his mom has manipulated him so much that now it's not her that's the sick one, it's him that's the sick one. And you see this almost very Junji Ito-like horror expression there, but grounded in reality, and so much more distressing to me. Here you see that he's kind of convincing himself that he's talking to himself rather than his cousin Shige, and he's asking himself to kill himself. Again, the weird distorted imagery that's showing the psychotic break, which now I'm pretty familiar with Oshimi's work, but still I think is really stunning here. And we get a replay of both the initial cliff push that his mother did to Shige and Shiichi's mother throwing himself over the cliff in the same spot. So he pushes Shige now, and actually this time winds up killing Shige. So he becomes responsible for his cousin's death after his mom hadn't actually managed to kill him. This leads to him being arrested. These really intense scenes here where he's getting, inspected as he's going into prison. So again, these traumatic experiences where this guy is just like coldly staring up his ass to make sure there's nothing going on there. Put in prison, going through trials. He's now admitted that he was the one who pushed Shige off the cliff. So he's totally got his mother off the hook all the way now, and has totally taken responsibility for it. There's some sense maybe that this is actually all what happened. He did drive his mom to it, but I think Oshimi maintains it pretty clearly that this is all due to, his mother having manipulated him into this just absolutely awful position. Okay, then the time jump happens at the end of Volume 13, beginning of Volume 14. Shiichi has now done his time in prison. He's been let out, and he's an adult now living his life removed from all of the trauma. Obviously, he's still having plenty of issues as an adult, but this is that standard Oshimi trick that I really like, that then swerves the story in a completely different direction by jumping to the future and showing that, 12, 13 volumes worth of abuse was just a setup for what comes next. How does the character move forward from that? And all of those just awful things that you experienced are now kind of abuses on you as well. And then the author's going to lead you through some kind of healing process. And I think that's really intense. So here we have Seiichi. He runs into the gal that he was trying to date earlier that mom drove away. He sees her again with her own kid. And so after a time of just being checked out and living an adult life, you get like, okay, we're checking back in because now he's being drawn back into this situation. This causes him to start having a kind of breakdown. Also, people are calling him up and telling him that his mother is still alive. Like he feels, fine, he feels settled, but someone calls him and is like, hey, your mom's still alive. We have her in protective custody. You get the sense that she has suffered dementia. She doesn't remember much. She was wandering around. We found her on the street. She doesn't know who she is. Could you come pick her up? And obviously he doesn't want to. He feels like he's moved past it and finally made peace with his past, and now he's getting sucked back into it, which is, something that happens in a couple of Oshimi's books. He's about ready to kill himself, basically. He's like had enough of life and, feel like, has moved on enough to like be able to work and operate in the world, but not moved on enough that he feels comfortable, and the world's no good with women, and, seeing this past the love of his pushes him over the edge. So he's trying to kill himself, but he can't do it. He gets sucked back in. Images like this show when Oshimi switches over into the brushier stuff, how effective he is in that at conveying mood and atmosphere. Then you get this really, really emotionally powerful sequence where he does finally come in to collect his mother, and you see that she's this frail old woman. You see the terror in his face as he's approaching her, like, oh my God, why am I doing this? And she says, my son. And there's this big pause, and he's seen her as an old woman. They're kind of reconnecting in the eye there. And then she looks at him, and he's seen her as how he remembers her. He can't help but map on that beautiful woman that she manipulated him into seeing her as. And then she says, I don't have children. And he has to continue dealing now with his mother in this state where she at least seems to, she may be pretending, maybe not, seems to have dementia and doesn't remember him. And he's just some random character in her life. But these just intense, I know Sean's poked fun at people wasting a 2-page spread on like a close-up of a face, but I think there's something really impactful about the way Oshimi does it, where this woman with her old like blind eyes and she's crying. This is also the volume where all of my suspicions that this is something that he, in some sense, dealt with in real life gets made very obvious in the afterword. A lot of times afterwards are comics, but this one's just a piece of writing. I'm just going to read a bunch of it. No matter how tightly I close the lid, it leaks out. I keep a lid on it knowing it will leak out. In fact, I look forward to it leaking out. When I feel its presence, I suffer. And when I realize I'm suffering, I feel a pleasure like that of sinking into addiction. I'm unable to have sex and barely even able to masturbate. I always end up thinking of it. I always hear a voice inside me reminding me I'm being watched. So I can only masturbate when I'm immersed in the waters of guilt. I always hear the voice in my head, but I don't know whose it is. Is it my mother's? Whoever it is, this unknown voice tells me, you mustn't be happy, you can't run away. You have to stay there forever. By now, I know I'm the one who's torturing myself, and that's what gets me off. No one else can come into it. Whenever I see a woman on the street, rage wells up inside of me. Every woman reminds me of my mother. Why is she smiling? What's she doing outside? Why is she running away? Why is she so happy? You're the one who told me to. You're the one who did it. You made a killer of me. So says the childhood me as I just sit there listening. All I can do is listen. I myself can't speak a word. I dream about that house in the town full of rust. I return alone to that house. The wallpaper is peeling, roaches and mouse droppings, corpses of tiny flies strewn everywhere. A sour, rotten odor permeates everything. Picture books I read as a child fill the closet. The sight of them bring back memories. Books my mother read to me over and over, the sound of her voice. I want to rip those books to pieces, but I can't because I have no hands. I want to vomit, but I can't because I have no mouth. And he goes on from there to talk about, like his relationship to the book and what he's doing. And then he says, the inner voice starts up again automatically. I wonder why it keeps talking and never stops. It was my mother who implanted the voice in me. Who implanted it in my mother? Was it her mother or was it me? Did my mother hear this voice inside her head too? So he doesn't get into the specifics, but I think it's pretty obvious they had a bad, strained, abusive relationship with his mother, and that all of his books are him trying to work it out. I'm assuming also, given that like abuse by classmates theme that shows up, that whatever was going on at home set him up for whatever happened between him and someone around his age, which is the theme of the next and final work, the one that I think is my favorite. Blood on the Tracks could become my favorite. I just don't know how it ends. But my favorite Shuzo Oshimi work most definitely has to be The Flowers of Evil. I will admit right out the gate that The Flowers of Evil is my favorite work of his, because it's the one that I feel most closely matches. I don't want to say, I don't know, I guess they were abusive relations. A particular abusive relationship I was in. I think that it was an unhealthy relationship from the start. I was making a bad choice even being in it, but it's definitely a relationship that I really felt like I was being manipulated and someone was trying to get me to do things that I didn't want to do. And I'll talk about that more in the book. Where I was attracted to someone who had a lot of abuse to deal with, and including that in their relationships, and trying to draw other people into their abuse and make them as gross as like someone who tried to make me as gross as they were. You get introduced pretty much right away. There's like a roll call happening in this class, and you get introduced to the two main characters of the first chunk of the book, the main character of the whole book. You meet Takao Kasuga, and you meet his abuser, who will be named in a couple pages, who sits right behind him. You also meet his crush, so again we have the love triangle here, where Takato is having a crush on Sake Nanako, and then the third character who inserts herself in the situation is Sawa Nakamura, who's mostly called Nakamura. And you get right out the gate, the teacher calls her name, and she gets into a fight with him and calls him a shit bug right away. And the teacher goes to slap her, and the look that she gives him just stops him in his tracks. And she is the abusive character throughout, and even kind of visually reminds me of the girl that I was with, that I had this awful relationship with. So that's the three main characters that sets up the core of the first part of the book, and sets up the story of abuse that the characters will have to overcome later. The story really kicks off when Kasuga goes in and finds Sake's gym clothes, and he just as a little kid, he started to smell her shampoo and stuff, and he's like basically sniffing her panties, and Nakamura catches him, and so she then follows him and uses the fact that she knows that he's scared, so he runs off and he takes the gym clothes with him because he gets startled. He's now got Sake's underwear because he ran off with it, and Nakamura knows that about him, and then is leveraging that as blackmail against him so she can begin her abuses and manipulations of him. The first thing is she just makes him promise that he's going to help carry her past the mountain they live in like a valley surrounded by mountains with the old town. This is the town that Oshimi grew up in, so he's dealing very explicitly in this book with being someone who escaped the small, crappy, dying town that he lived in. That bit I read in Blood on the Tracks talks about that too, returning to that town. So she's someone who also wants to escape and sees Kasuga as her escape route, basically, and is holding him to this promise right out the gate. The abuses kick in pretty quickly. She makes him put on Sakei's shirt and panties under his clothes, sets up a date for them, so that's similar to some of the other books like Welcome Back Alice and stuff, where characters like helping somebody else achieve their dating goal, but it's only a manipulation to get and create this love triangle that they can manipulate and then force a choice between two people. So here she is putting on Sakei's clothes, making him do it, putting him down in a fairly sexual way, and then forces him to go out on a date with Sakei, sets up a date for them, and makes him go out on this date with these clothes underneath. She's also threatening, like continually saying, like, I know you're a pervert. Like, I want to see a real deal, genuine pervert. Raise this town with genuine perversion. So she's obviously finding someone who she thinks is as perverse as herself, and she thinks that they're hiding it and wants to bring that out of them. And I think that's where I really feel personally resonant with this book, is I was with someone who wanted me to lean into their level of perversion in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. But like at the beginning, that's kind of exciting. You know, you got someone who's a little edgy, someone who's a little bit of a freak, and that can really draw you in. But then as you go further and you aren't the person that they're trying to get you to be, the struggle there is real, and it leaves a lot of lasting, kind of fucks you up. Also think in the drawing here, this is all kind of pretty standard, but the way he like barely renders her nipple showing through here, this is the stuff that Kasuga is picking up in this situation, right? These slight things that are sexualized while he's being abused, he's also being titillated. So lots of abuses, lots of things go on. Eventually convinces him that he is the outsider, the pervert. This all kicks off, by the way, because he's a real big fan of the book The Flowers of Evil by Baudelaire, and she sees him reading that, and that's one of the reasons she picks him. Also, obviously, she sees him stealing the underwear, so she thinks he's a pervert for sniffing the underwear. But they go in and they just absolutely trash their classroom, paint this eye that's from the book, which is a big symbol of this eye, flower eye thing on the cover of the book is a big symbol. Just totally destroy this classroom. That sets off like a panic in the town where everyone's trying to figure out who's the panty thief, who's trashing the classroom. All this, that continues to be a mystery through the next volume or so. At the end of this big first volume that collects really the first three, there's a kind of emotional apex point where they do head off on his bike to go over the mountain. At this point in time, Sakei has developed real feelings for Kasuga. They've been on dates and developed real feelings, and she chases them up onto the mountain as they're going over the mountain on his bike in the rain, and basically Nakamura is trying to keep him as hers, as her way out, as her pervert. And Sakei is the one here being like, the angel that's coming to redeem him. You see, it's basically the demon on one shoulder and the angel on the others. And she's like, you don't have to be this. Like, you're an interesting, creative person, but that's a beautiful thing. You don't have to see it as a bad thing. And so Nakamura is like, okay, fine, you go be that. You go be that, like, boring, normal person. And he's pretty much like set on going with Sakei until Nakamura calls him boring and says, crawl off and live in this town as a shitbug all of your life. And that, with the set of abuses that she's already put him through, these things that makes him feel special. You know, he is special. He is a kid who's interested in literature and poetry and all of these things. He has an identity ahead of his classmates, something I identify with. You know, knew I wanted to be an artist, and I grew up with most of my classmates not knowing what they wanted to do yet. So he is someone who's like rounding out as a person, and someone else latches onto that and abuses it. And so here, after all of those abuses, that accusation of you're just going to go be a normal, boring person, like that is her claw into him. And he leaves Sake, who would have been much, much better for him, and chases after Nakamura. And then again, you get one of those classic, you know, Shuzo Oshimi over the shoulder looks that's both like seductive and challenging and judgmental. He wraps so much into those. In volume 2, it's a lot of just back and forth between Sake and Nakamura and Kasuga, their relationship. One of Sake's friends gets involved. There's like an investigation into who's the panty thief. So all the stories that are piling up in volume 1, now that they haven't made it over the mountain, just continue. And Nakamura is spending the whole time just drawing him further and further into, you know, having control over him. Like in this scene here, she says, I let you enter into contracts with me. Like he's saying, like, you know, I'm gonna break it. It's you know, my contract. I'm in charge. And then she does what he says and sits down and immediately reasserts control. I let you enter into contracts with me, you fucking pervert. You got that. And then she does, you know, like the crossed legs, I'm going to show my panties thing. Meanwhile, Sake's friend is trying to help her get out of this abusive situation with Kasuga, quit worrying about him, figuring out that that he's the panty thief. So a lot of this stuff comes out. Some really amazing imagery all throughout. But for expedience sake, we're going to jump towards the end, and we'll read this sequence here that I think really shows the kind of core of the first chunk of the book, where Nakamura is attacking him. You know, he's trying to get out. He's coming to her, like expressing his love for her, apologizing. He's saying the other side that you're trying to get to, it's inside of you. It's not over the mountain. Like, you're teaching me how to reach the other side. And so in this sense, the other side is like the other side of morality. It's a complete escape from all things. And she says, yeah, it's been screaming in all the time, my perv down there, in words that I didn't know. It kept screaming, Kasuga, it bounced off you, Kasuga. And I understood what it said, the scream. I could hear it. I want to get out. So she had something in her that she couldn't deal with. And until she saw maybe a hint of that in him, she didn't know what it was. And her abuses of him are her trying to find herself. And she saw someone who stood out as a person, as not just one of the pack, and latched onto that, and then is trying to make him into this thing so that she can become this thing. Let me out, set me free. Where is it? Where's the exit? Where's the other side? But now I know there is no other side. There's no this side, nothing at all. No shitbugs, no pervs. Now there's nothing left, because no matter where I go, I can't get rid of me. And that intense, like, hatred of the self that she's like pouring out onto him becomes very evident. And this is, I think, the most intense scene in any of his books, at least for me, because I basically dealt with someone who I think was trying to do something similar. But she says, this is my last order. With this bat, bash my brains into mushy, pulpy goo to the very last bit, and that'll end our contract. Come on, hurry, hurry. And he can't do it. Like, you know, she's manipulated him into loving her, and then asks him to do this awful thing. And then he's like, come on, like, this tomorrow, let's, like, I can't do it. And so she then says, well, like, suicide pact, let's do this together, basically. The relationship I was in, I very much felt as we went along that the girl was starting to ask me to abuse her, basically. You know, at first, like, in a sexual content, will you hit me? I want to be hit while we have sex. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. But as the relationship went on, I really felt like someone was trying to turn me into a monster. And I realized there was this very weird play going on where she was trying to play the submissive role, right? Like, oh, I want to be beat. I want to be hit. I want you to put me on a dog collar and lead me around and make me eat food. I mean, that's like that's real. That was a legit request. Things like that, where someone was trying to turn me into a monster and I didn't want to be a monster. And at a certain point, it felt like the only way out of it, like if I went down that route, the only way out of it would be to kill somebody, would be to kill her. Because there was this fucked up power game going on where it's like through this fake submission, you can do whatever you want to me. It was basically gaining control and like trying to turn me into things she wanted. And like if you're starting to play that chess game, and if you do if you do let someone turn you into a monster, you're not going to let them control you. Like you're either going to realize that you're the one that's being controlled, and like you're the one being abused, or if you really are turned into a monster, if you really do let yourself become that, then the monster is not a real monster is not going to lose, and the only way out would be to kill someone. And I really felt like that was the long game of what this person was trying to get out of me. They were trying to either make a monster that they could control and somehow resolve their issues by having a fake monster, or create a real monster that would in the end kill them. And so like the only real answer to that is just bail out of the situation, get out of it. But it's an intense set of feelings to be put through. And yeah, like it fucked my head up for a good while. And so this scene here really, I think that's why this is my favorite of his books, is because it's the one that's like, man, I've been through something similar and I know how tortured of a place that was. And it seems like he must have gone through something similar as well. So this here is just a super intense scene for me. So instead of killing her, they decide that they're going to do a suicide pact, and they raid this big parade that's happening in town. And they jump up onto the big float, pour gas all over themselves, and they've got a knife, and they're going to light themselves on fire and basically do this like performance art thing to fuck with everyone in the town, because they've decided there is no other side. The only way out is to kill yourself. Life itself is this awful trap. This is their answer out. At this point, you see the eye imagery that's such a big symbol throughout the book, that's taken from the cover of the Flowers of Evil book that Kasuga has been reading. He sees that eye fully open and staring at him. It's like that's the existential angst made visible, and they're getting ready to do it. He's totally sold, and for some reason Nakamura pushes him off and is gonna just kill herself and not take him with her, which is like the ultimate abuse, because you've pushed someone to the point where they're ready to die, and then you deny them even that, and then are going to selfishly take it yourself. Someone actually stops her. Someone in the crowd jumps in and stops her from killing herself. So she's still alive as well, and he's just left without answers. And you see at that point that for him the flower closes, like symbolically that's been denied him. His own evilness that he thought he had has been fully denied him by her, and he's left with that. Then you get the time jump for significantly further in the future. Now he's off at university, really disconnected from everyone else. He's gotten out of the situation he's in. He's out of home. I think he's in Tokyo. He's in the big city. Very closed off, very shy with women, still obviously a fucked up person, but has moved on in life. Aya Tokiwa, this girl is a girl that's in his class, and he's starting to form a crush on her. She's beautiful, and they're hanging out in like the same friend group, and then he sees her at a bookstore looking at the book, The Flowers of Evil. He has pretty much given up reading, like the core of his identity. Some beautiful poetic person who has an interest in literature and is a creative person, that's got stripped away from him, and he's just going through the motions. And he starts to form this connection with Aya, where she starts giving him books, and she reopens his interest in literature. And then as they start to hang out, they have a platonic relationship at first, where he's obviously interested in her, but she's just talking to someone that actually, has interests that mimic hers. They're hanging out. She's similar to Mary, I think, in this book, that she's like the beautiful, pretty girl, smart, got the popular friends, but she's feeling very locked in by that identity. She has a more creative part to her. She has a deeper part in her as well, that she wants to have flower and bloom. And they start pulling that out of each other and form a relationship. Eventually, he's going over to her house, and he's the only person, including her boyfriend, he's the only person that she's ever let into her room, because they're trading books. And he finds a notebook with the barest notes of a story that she wants to tell. Throughout the course of this, of course, they wind up together. She breaks up with her boyfriend, all of that stuff. And he's encouraging her, he reads the bare bones of the plot, and it so mimics his experience in his hometown. I think it's a ghost story, but it mimics his experience. He's like, you've got to write this. And he becomes like her biggest fan, and he's pushing her forward, and their relationship builds around that. And now you're seeing that someone has seen him as special for the good part of him, rather than Nakamura, who saw him as special because he was the outsider, because he had something more going on, but she mapped her own badness onto it. Now he's in a relationship where someone is encouraging his uniqueness in a positive way. He also runs back into Sake later on in the book, and is talking about, where she's at, how she dealt with the situation of their youth. There's some really intense conversations there. So volume 3 ends with Kasuga and Tokiwa Aya's relationship starting to come fruition, but she can tell, especially after he runs back into Sakai, that there's stuff about his past he's not letting go. There's something he's keeping from her that's a barrier to their relationship, so their relationship's in a struggle. She gets a sense that it has to do with his hometown. He has to go back home because his grandfather is dying, and he really doesn't want to go back to the hometown, because that's obviously the site of his trauma, the place that he was trying to escape so hard from. He doesn't want Aya to come with him, which is putting a strain on their relationship. You see these really, again, great scenes where Oshimi's leaning into the more Paul Popey kind of brushwork. He's leaning into the darker art. He's really giving a sense of like the place and the environment. Kasuga runs back into Sake's friend, who had figured out that he was the panty thief, that him and Nakamura were the kind of the bad guys in the early part of the book. And all that leads to him coming home, and him and Tokiwa get together, and she's finished the novel that he's been encouraging her to write, and he says, I can't read this the way I am. I've got to tell you some things. And then there's this really awesome spread here that's a collage of just all of the emotional shit that he went through in the first 2/3 of the book or so. And he's just pouring it out. He's pouring it out to Aya, and she takes it all in and accepts him and loves him for who he is, and says hey, the Sake's friend told you that she knows where Nakamura is. We need to go confront her. You need to get this out of you, and I'm going to go with you. And so they go, and they find Nakamura at her family's diner. She's serving them. She totally remembers who he is. She seems to have worked out whatever her issues are. She seems much happier in life. Her mom is talking to them a bit. He has to have this confrontation with her. So they go together. Aya goes with him as a couple. and he has to get the answer to the question that he's been wondering the whole time. Why did you shove me way back then? Like all of the abuse he can kind of sort out and deal with, but it's like, why didn't you let me go with you? And they have to have that cathartic moment. And I don't want to show it, but there's an amazing drawn out scene where they have this big cathartic moment together that I think plays really, really well. He really lands the ending on that. And then there's a long sequences of these more surreal passages that are kind of the emotional come down of the book, where the characters get, everyone gets kind of their resolution in some metaphoric sense. You get to see them move on into their real lives, all of the different characters in these silent sequences here, everyone who was impacted by this situation. And then the very last chapter is a retelling of the first sequence in the book, where you get some sense of what Nakamura's damage was, and you get some sense of how she existed in the world. And this reminds me of A Silent Voice as well, where the autistic character in that book sees everyone with X's over their face. This is similar. She sees everyone as just these awful things. And I kind of relate to that too, because I have a real hard time, like, humans are just humans to me until I get to know them. And I don't like humanity that much. I don't like humans that much, because like in mass, when you're just part of the mass, like I can only see what I don't judge any particular human I run into on that, but it's just the mass of humanity. We've done a lot of bad things. But as soon as I get to know a person, and I'm always trying to get to know a person because I want to move past where it's just this blank individual, then it's like, oh, I know people. I like people. I really like people, but humans I don't like. And you can see this here represented. She just sees all the shit bugs, right? This is the sequence with the teacher. Like, this is all she can see is this guy, like, bleh, and that look, that she gives him from that point that stops him in the tracks. It's like she has so little regard for him that really killed him. But then you see this moment, and this is similar again to The Silent Voice, where all of a sudden there's not an X over someone's face, where someone becomes a person to the character that feels like an outsider. And that's the moment where she sees him sniffing the panties, and she sees him as a person. She's seen him reading the book, and she sees him doing this thing that then she can relate to. She gets a sense of who he is as someone also a little bit on the outside, and that's why she chooses him. In her mind, I don't even think she's thinking about a victim. She's just desperately kind of grasping to try and find her own humanity, and it takes seeing someone else as a person first. And so there's a good wrap up to that. And it's just, this is such an intense, powerful book that explores, the most intense, like, emotions. Of course, like I said, the other ones also explore those emotions pretty thoroughly from a lot of different angles, the abuse from the mother and all of that. But this one really lands for me because, like I said, it comes pretty close to a really uncomfortable, like, half-year long experience or so that I had in my life, and touches on a lot of themes. I don't think I struggle with them anymore. I've worked them out pretty good, but themes I struggled with. And that's part of why I like his books too. Like, I feel like a lot of books end where his books really start. His books, most books would like end at the 2/3 way through, and he's always using the first 2/3 to set up the real work, which is the adulting part of it, the moving on, the coming to terms with it, seeing why someone else was in that state, not painting them just as a bad guy, but seeing these cycles of damage and cycles of trauma and stuff. So I just absolutely love his work. As much as the first parts of his stories are always absolutely off-putting and uncomfortable to me, it always it keeps me engaged. I have to keep going even though I'm uncomfortable, because it's so masterfully written and so masterfully drawn. Like the twists and turns that he takes sells his work. So SHUZO OSHIMI is absolutely one of my favorite writers, I think, and has produced some of these are in the top 5, top 10 comics of all time for me. And Flowers of Evil by far is my number one on the list. But like I said, pretty much everything from Devil's Ecstasy on up is great comics. So I understand that a lot of people would have varying opinions on that. And for people who have read all of these works and the majority of these works, please tell me in the comments, what's yours? Why do you like it? What do you like about Oshimi's work?
Back to the land, let's get away, just for one day. Let me see you stripped down to the bone. Let me see you stripped down to the bone.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.